It's the Legend of Zelda, and it's really rad. Those creatures from Ganon are pretty bad, with Octoroks, Tektites, and Levers too. But with your help, our hero pulls through. Intense. Intense indeed, but 80s advertising aside, I'm Ennis, and I'm here to talk about one of my favorite game series of all time, The Legend of Zelda. In fact, I want to do a whole series of retrospectives on the series, but I'm getting ahead of myself. You see, I actually planned on doing this back in 2019. It was my New Year's resolution. Needless to say, it didn't quite happen. Now, in order to help me, I'm not doing this as a resolution thing. I'm just doing this because I want to. As such, there's also no time limit I'm giving myself, so it may not be finished this year, and we'll see how long it goes. But because of trying last year, though, this first retrospective comes at a unique cost. I have a script from last year in full that I will make several comparisons to, and I think that it will come in handy, especially when I talk about a particular dungeon, but we'll get to that later. So before we begin, I have a disclaimer to tell you all. I've been in this game before, and I'll be doing as much as I can without a guide, basically going off memory. That being said, I have no qualms about using a guide, and if I need to resort to using one, I will. But I'll let you know when that happens. But anyways, without further ado, it is time to start this retrospective series. And what better place to start than with the original for the NES, The Legend of Zelda. And so, we begin. And because it is dangerous to go alone, I collect the sword from the old man. My next goal is to not go into a dungeon, oh no. It is to become as powerful as I can first. And to do that, I'll need heart containers. From my memory, there is none that you can just get, so because of that, my first goal is to save up enough rupees so that I can buy some bombs. And they're actually kind of cheap. They only cost 20 rupees. Shouldn't be hard to get, right? Saying that, I know some enemies drop bombs. I believe they need to be blue enemies, and there are plenty of them, so I give it a try. And I get lucky when I kill a blue moblin. This is good because there are other things I need to buy as well, namely the blue candle. But before that, I have what I need to start my heart container hunt. I go to the beach, where my first secret heart container is. And before I even get to place the bomb, I get killed. So I go back there, I bomb the wall I need, and I find an old man offering me two things. A heart container, and a potion. Unless someone's going for a 3-heart run, I don't know how anyone in their right mind would pick the potion. Tangent aside, I pick up the heart container. And promptly die. The next thing I do is I get 60 rupees, and I go to buy the blue candle. No issues, so I continue to explore the world, dying many times. At this point, I will note, it's 1 o'clock while I'm playing this. I'm somewhat tired and not playing well, so at this point, I'm done for the night. I'll come back and play it tomorrow. So, I'm just going to note this as well. I am using save slates only so I can come back to it the next time I want to play. I won't be using it for cheating, don't worry. And I am back! So let's go collect some heart containers. Or die first. Okay, so eventually I do find something awesome. I find the white sword from the old man. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough hearts at the time to take it, so I just put it in the back of my mind for later. And soon after that, I was actually able to find the rock I was looking for in the northern area. And proceed to burn it like it's a bush. Yeah, I forgot that I didn't have my bombs on me, so I switch out my bombs and try to bomb it open. And I got my 5th heart container. So, at this point while I'm in the northeast, I also decided to go get an item that will be useful for later. The letter from the old man. Side note, when I was younger, I thought that this was a flipper. But yeah, anyways, that aside, after a while, I got a ton of rupees. Thanks to something that is a secret to everybody. And with that, it was time to buy the most expensive item in the game. The blue ring. With this, it'll be a lot harder for enemies to kill me. So, with the blue ring in hand, I next went to the lake, because I'm 99% sure that there was a bush around this area that has a heart container. After trying multiple bushes on the same screen many times, I finally find it, getting my 6th heart. And with my 6th heart, I'm finally ready to collect the white sword, so that's more or less the next thing I did there. And I swung it around with so much joy. Oh, using it is so awesome. I knew it was twice as powerful as the plain sword, but so many enemies go down in one hit now at rocks. At least overworld enemies. But anyways, that's where I am now. And next time, I'll be going for some freedom. So, what exactly do I mean by freedom? Well, one of the amazing things about this game, that for the most part is not in future games, Breath of the Wild excluded of course, is that in this game, you have absolute freedom. Outside of a few item gates, and of course the final dungeon, you can do the dungeons in any order. Because of that, the rule I want to follow for this playthrough is that I will not be following the official dungeon order. And what better way to start with that than going straight for the 8th dungeon. Okay, if I'm being completely honest, I have no intention of doing the 8th dungeon yet. But if my memory is right, there is an item in this dungeon that will break the game. And it's pretty close to the entrance too, so I intend to get it. So I go in, head left, take on Manhandla easily enough with my bombs, and then I go into the next room. There are a ton of Gibdos and Dark Nuts. And some stairs, and I know the item is behind those stairs, or down those stairs I should say. So, it actually takes me 4 tries to clear the room. But I finally clear it and gain access to the stairs. And I have now broken the game by collecting the magic... That's not the magical key. That's the Book of Magic. I can't even use that yet. Oh, great. What a magical waste of time. Oh well, after that, I tried to explore the dungeon a little more, but like I said before, I was never going to make this my first dungeon. I was just using it to grab the magical key, which wasn't even there. Oh well. So I left. I ended up making my way to the 6th dungeon. I'm not doing too bad in Dungeon 6, or at least I thought I wasn't doing too bad. That changed when I got to the room with the red and blue whiz robes and the like-likes. After being defeated here, I decided to head out and do Dungeon 3. Or what I thought was Dungeon 3. It was actually the 2nd dungeon. But at this point, I needed a pick-me-up, so I said screw it and went into the dungeon anyways. The dungeon was extremely easy. I mean, it's the second dungeon, so I'm not exactly surprised. I get to Dongo Dongo easy enough, and I take him out just as easily. And I collect my first piece of the Triforce. And then I'm thinking to myself, there's something wrong here. I never collected the dungeon item, and I'm pretty sure there is one. I haven't cleared out the entire dungeon, so I should definitely have it. At this point, for the first time, excluding checking names, which I don't count, I go to Zelda Dungeon to check out their guide on level 2. And yeah, the dungeon does have the magic boomerang. So I'm wondering why I didn't get it. I looked, and actually, turns out I did get it. When I killed the enemies in that room, I was standing right where the item spawned, so I just didn't notice that I got it. So after that, I did check, and I did confirm that I did have the magic boomerang, which is surprising considering I don't have the regular boomerang. It would have been cool if they set that to whichever you don't have as the first one you collect, but whatever. But anyways, it's time to move on now. Just for fun, I decide to run back to Dungeon 8. By the way, that will be a running theme during this retrospective. At least until I beat it, that is. Speaking of which, I don't yet. So after that, I decide I'll go try Dungeon 6 again. And this time I decide to actually go the right path. I'm positive it's a dead end, or at least I'm 90% sure, so I figure I might as well try it. Unfortunately, I proved myself right. It is a dead end. But it's actually not pointless. There's the old man in there giving a hint. Aim for the eyes of Goma. Now, if Goma is the enemy I think it is, then I need the bow and arrows in order to get by it, meaning I will not be able to clear this dungeon. So I leave it in search of another dungeon. In my search, I make my way to Lost Hills, and yes, I did actually have to search that name up. I remember from a previous playthrough, though, that if you just keep going up, you can get to something. So I tried that, and I was right. I found Dungeon 5. Soon enough, I've gone through as much of the dungeon as I could, which consists of one entrance, one old man room, a room with a bunch of killer bunnies, and a room with a river running through it. Oh, and before anyone mentions it, I know they're called Pole's Voice, but when I was a kid, I call them killer bunnies. It's an old habit, and you know what they say about old habits? They die like killer bunnies. They're kinda hard to take out. But anyways, I do take them out, and the old man is useless to me this time. And then I go to the last room available, the one with the river in it. And I realize the only way I'm getting by this dungeon is with the ladder first. And so I spend the next half hour searching for a dungeon I haven't even found yet. At this point, I go over the dungeons. So far I've done Dungeon 2. I know where Dungeon 1 is, but I don't want to do it until I get more dungeons under my belt. I know where Dungeon 3 is, but I don't want to do it right after Dungeon 2. I know where Dungeon 5 and 6 are, but both of them require items I don't have yet. And I know where Dungeon 8 is, and I do not have the ability to beat it yet. Meaning I need to find either Dungeon 4 or 7. I'm almost positive I need the flute to get to Dungeon 7, so I need to be on the lookout for Dungeon 4. I go on a massive search, but find almost nothing. Well, actually that's not true. I did find the magic sword, but that won't help me yet. It takes me a while, but I soon remember that one of the dungeons in the game requires a ladder or a raft. At this point, I forgot which. So in other words, at this point, I am stuck. I need to do either 1 or 3. Dungeons 1 or 3, that is. And I've wasted my last half hour. It was a bit frustrating, though I will say it was kind of fun. It's kind of like a good frustration. That sounds like it should be a song. It was a good frustration. Sorry, I won't do that again. But because I want to make Dungeon 1 more of a joke than it already will be, I start with Dungeon 3. So I went straight there. I was actually a bit surprised that I had to deal with some red dark nuts, but they weren't an issue. In fact, I was able to breeze through this dungeon so fast, I was facing off against Manhandle again before I even found the dungeon item. So I beat him, I get the heart container, and the second piece of the Triforce. And I go right back into the dungeon. At this point, I'm willing to search every room in the dungeon, even if I have to use a few extra keys. I want to make sure I find any items in there. And I do manage to find the item. It was the raft. I search the rest of the dungeon, and all I find are a few keys and a swastika. Wait, what? I meant the map, but the map itself for this dungeon looks like a swastika. And if I didn't already know the story behind how it's actually a Japanese religious symbol called a manji, and it was co-opted by the Nazi Party, and how in Japan it still retains its original meaning, I would be a lot more like, what the hell is going on here? Saying that, with how controversial the symbol is in the West, and with how the West associates the symbol with only the swastika, I'm amazed that Nintendo didn't change the dungeon layout when they brung it over to the West. That aside, it's time to move on from Dungeon 3. So after getting the raft, I knew it wouldn't help me in Dungeon 5 or 6. In terms of helping me with dungeons, it can only really help me in getting to Dungeon 4. And right after Dungeon 3, Dungeon 4 is the last thing I want to do. So I will soon be heading to Dungeon 8 again. But before that, I do check around the world to see if I can use the raft to find any extra heart containers. In fact, when I'm looking around, I can only find 2 docks. One that brings me to the entrance of level 4, like I mentioned before, and a dock on the east coast that I can use to get into an old man who will offer me a heart container. After that, like I said before, I went back to Dungeon 8. I did a lot better than I ever had before, though I did need 2 swigs of the potion, but got caught on a few different rooms. So I left. I finally decided to take on the first dungeon. I make sure that before I even go to the boss, I get the item for the dungeon. It's the bow, though I am going to need to buy some arrows before I can use it. While I'm at it, I also get the pointless boomerang since I already have the magic boomerang. And then, I finally take on the big bad boss, Aquamentus. Yeah, I take him down without even taking any damage. Although I do take a hit, but that gets drained due to my blue ring. But anyways, now that it's down, there is something I've always wondered. Is it actually possible to do a 3-heart run in this game? I mean, look. Here is where Aquamentus drops the heart. There is no way to get from this room to the next room without going over that tile. Well, whatever. Moving on, I collect the piece of heart and the Triforce piece. And I am done with Dungeon 1. So now that I'm out, I need to get the arrows so that I can use my new bow. I head straight for the shop and get them. And then head straight to Dungeon 8. This time, I actually get a lot further than I have before. And other than using a key that I probably should not have, I think I actually did pretty good this time. I even take out a Goma with my new bow and arrows. Other than that though, I reproved that I can't beat this dungeon yet. At this point, even though I don't want to do Dungeon 4 yet, I want the stepladder more, and I'm fairly sure that the stepladder is in there. So I set out for the dock on the lake. The dungeon itself is somewhat annoying. There are a lot of vires, which when I hit them turn into keys. And keys are my least favorite enemies because of how erratic they are. Saying that, with the magic boomerang in hand, it wasn't too bad to get through them. Eventually, I'm able to find the stepladder, which I'll be talking about a bit at the end of the video. And I finally get to the boss, Gleeok, the harder dragon. And it beats me. Though, saying that, I only went in with half a heart, so I'm not really surprised. I try again, and it kills me again. At this point, I leave the dungeon to refill my hearts, go back in, wreck him, and then I get the 4th piece of the Triforce. And with the 4th piece in hand, and more importantly, the stepladder in hand, I head to the docks on the east that has a piece of heart on it. Or heart container on it, I should say. And I use the stepladder to walk across them and get my 12th heart. And with the 12th heart, I can finally get the magic sword. With the power of the magic sword in hand, I think I finally have a chance to beat the 8th dungeon. So, like you probably guessed, I'm heading back. The first thing I do is go into the room with a ton of blue dark nuts. And I actually do good. Which just reaffirms my idea that I can beat this dungeon. I do a lot more exploring, even managing to find a room that wasn't on the map, which would be a lot more impressive if there wasn't just a regular door that led to it. But whatever. I try the other way, find some stairs, take out some enemies in the room, go down the stairs, and I was right! I knew the magic key was in this dungeon, even if I was way off on the location of it. And with it, the rest of the dungeons are going to be easy to get around. But that aside, I go on my way to the other stairs in the dungeon, and I died. At this point, I knew that I'm going to need full hearts, and probably a red potion, so I left the dungeon to get that red potion. Once I got back, I had what was probably one of my most worst runs through the dungeon. I did manage to make it to the boss though. Unfortunately, I only had 1 heart left, and I was facing a 4-head Gleeok. And I had already used both uses of my potion on the way to him. Yeah, he creamed me. So I left, got another potion, came back, and I fared a lot better this time. In fact, I didn't even use the potion until I got 3 of the Gleeok's 4 heads killed. After taking a swig, I was able to beat him no problem. I got my heart, my 5th piece of Triforce, and with the magical key in hand, I completed the 8th dungeon. Oh, I am so happy about that. At this point, I know the order I want to do the last 3 dungeons in. To start with, I go back through the graveyard and go to Dungeon 6. Once in, I learned something about the Wizrobes. If you defeat the leader, you defeat all of them. And I know that because that's what happened here, and it looked awesome. But anyways, as I went deeper into the dungeon, I ran across something very surprising. A Gleeok. I always thought that Gleeoks were bosses, like final bosses. I didn't think that any of them ran a mini-boss. But saying that, it goes down fast enough. Beyond that, I finally find the rod, so I can make use of the magic book I found at the beginning of the game. In the 8th dungeon. Beyond that, there really isn't much more to this dungeon. I take out Goma, get another heart container, and get the 6th piece of the Triforce. And speaking of the Triforce, I now have the Triforce of Power, Wisdom, and Courage. It's pretty cool how that worked out. Anyways, since level 7 is blocked off since I don't have the flute yet, my next level is level 4. Well, on the way there, I got a realization. There's a dungeon that requires the meat. I don't remember at which point if it's the 5th or the 7th, but I don't feel like risking it right now. I grind rupees until I have 100 of them, and then I get a piece of meat. Then I go to Dungeon 5 at the Lost Hills again. While killing the Armos outside the dungeons to heal up, one moves and actually reveals a staircase. I did not know about that, so I go in, and apparently there are 2 entrances to Dungeon 5. Not that it matters, though. They both lead to the same place. Anyways, other than a few dark nuts, I get through the dungeon easy enough. In fact, because I found the flute, the boss Digdogger is cake. And now then, it's time for my 8th dungeon. Dungeon 7. And there's a reason I saved it for last. Now, Dungeon 7 is a very interesting case for this retrospective. Like I said earlier, I tried to do this retrospective last year, and this dungeon stuck with me in a very special way. It was, hands down, the worst dungeon in the game. Possibly the entire Legend of Zelda series. It was so bad that I remember a lot of the issues I had with it to this day. And like I said earlier, I actually do have the script from last year. So before I go over what happened this time, I'll go over what happened last year. So, without further ado, take it away, last year me. Up to this point in the game, I'd only experienced any frustration once. That was when I was searching for dungeons 2 and 3. The difference between then and during this dungeon was at least I was having fun exploring Hyrule back then. This dungeon, not so much. I'm getting ahead of myself though. When I first got to this dungeon, I did some exploring, like I normally do. And I make some good ground. Specifically, I make this much ground. Now, this is where I start to get annoyed. You see, I spent about 30 minutes going all around the dungeon. So long that by this point I know this part of the dungeon by heart. I was convinced that you had to bomb some sort of wall, and in all fairness, I was right. But I want to show you something more. You see, apart from what I explored, I'd also discovered the map, and with the map, I knew that the dungeon looked like this. On top of this, because of the roar mechanic, where you can hear the boss from any adjacent room, I knew that the boss was right here. Now, I swear to God, I bombed just about every wall that had another room on the other side, based on the map. Nothing yielded. I kept at this until I thought of something. What if there were secret rooms? Thinking like that, I soon discovered this room in the northwest part of the dungeon. That's fine, I actually like those type of secrets. I think they're good. They're fun to discover. It is this secret room that was the issue. You see, in order to move on in the dungeon, you have to bomb into a secret room that isn't on the map. That's not intuitive, and I can honestly argue that it is the worst mechanic in the entire game. Or worst design, I should say, not mechanic. I would like to say that this was all my issues with the dungeon, but it wasn't. In this room here, one of the rooms I had become very familiar with, we had the old man giving a hint. There is a secret in the tip of the nose. Believe it or not, that actually is a hint to this dungeon. Except, it doesn't make much sense. Let's go back to the map again. This dungeon is called the Dragon. Okay, post me going in, I want to make note of something. I said this is the Dragon. Yeah, I was wrong. I looked it up and it is actually not the dragon, it is the demon. It doesn't really change anything. The only difference is I pretty much just got the name wrong. All my thoughts still apply, it's just replace the word dragon with demon. Anyways, back to past me now. Except, I have to stretch my imagination so far to even be able to see it as a dragon, even after I knew what it was called. On top of that, when I was actually playing it, I did not know that it was called a dragon. So the only contextual clue that it was a dragon was the shape of the map. And I did not see a dragon in the shape of the map until after I learned the dungeon's name. Now, in this room, the solution is not to bomb the wall, but to push a block which opens up a staircase. Outside of opening doors which you could already see, this has never been a mechanic in the entire game, and you've never had to push a block like this. But we're finally at the end of my issues with this dungeon, right? Wrong. Well, okay, in reality, the last issue I have with this dungeon is practically a non-issue when you compare to the first two issues. It's the boss. Once I finally got to the boss room, I had to fight this guy. Again. Aquamentus. You have to face off against the first boss in the game. Now, don't get me wrong. I get why they did this, in order to make you feel just how much stronger you have become. But, honestly, at this point, I was hoping for a challenge. Aquamentus just did not live up to what I wanted here. Like I said, minor nitpick. But after such a frustrating dungeon, I wanted to beat down on a challenge. Thanks, past me. I would like to say that I remember every frustrating thing from that part of the playthrough, but I did not. Well, I did remember it, I just forgot some of the details. Once I got to the small lake, I played the flute and went right into the dungeon. At first I explored as much as I could before the part where I bombed the wall, and I'm glad that I did that. I found an old man who was willing to sell me a way to carry more bombs. And honestly, I'm glad he did, because 8 would not be enough for this dungeon. At this point, I don't have enough rupees, but since I know where he is, I'll just go back to him later after I collect enough in the dungeon. Eventually, I also stumble upon the Moblin, who wants the meat. And since required, I am glad I picked it up for him a while ago. Finally, I decided to go for the bomb on the wall. I went through it, and there is a staircase. After beating all the enemies in there, I go down only to discover that it is not a pass-through staircase, but one with an item in it, the red candle. At this point, I don't need the red candle, and something's not adding up to me right now. I searched the dungeon again, before I realized that I didn't bomb the walls in the room with the staircase on the other side. So I go to that room straight away and succeed. I found my way to the next part of the dungeon. I eventually get up to the tip of the nose, so to speak, and I'm fairly sure that there is a staircase that opens up after pushing a block. Unfortunately for me, I forgot which block it is to push. And the wall masters here aren't making it easy to remember the right one. After being caught by the wall masters twice, I finally find the correct block to push, and I head down. There's not really much more to say about the dungeon. I'm not frustrated by having to fight the Aquamentus this time, though that's probably because I remember having to fight it at the end of this dungeon anyways. I also think that it's a little fitting that the final boss I fight this playthrough before going to the final dungeon is the same as the first boss in the game. Well, first official boss. Saying that, at this point, this is still the most frustrating dungeon to me. But it's also the most memorable dungeon. At least from the original game, anyways. But anyways, now that that's done, it's time to finish this. Well, before that, I actually need to do a little bit of preparation. Mainly getting a red potion, a new big shield, and having a decent amount of rupees on hand. After I get what I need and have a decent stockpile of rupees on hand, I finally head to the final dungeon. I start the dungeon by scoping out the early parts of the dungeon. I continue through the dungeon, going through a lot of staircases. And there are an awful lot of hard rooms to take on, actually. I'd be lying if I said I never died. Saying that, through my searches, I did actually manage to find the door to Ganon. Not going to do me much good though, seeing as you kinda need the silver arrows in order to kill Ganon. I keep searching for the silver arrows, which I know for a fact are in this dungeon. But I keep searching and I keep dying. After almost 2 hours, I give up. I decided to go old school. I grab a piece of paper and a pen, and with it I go through the dungeon, marking each room as I go along. By the end of it, I have this map, and with it I am finally able to know where I have been, and I use that knowledge to find the silver arrows. I then use the map to go to Ganon. I should have been able to take him out the first time, but as I was about to take a potion, he spawns on top of me, taking more hearts than I'm able to deal with at this point, and he kills me. Whatever. I heal up, get more potion, and go in for a round 2. This time, I'm a lot luckier. I keep swinging my sword and manage to hit him enough times. When he goes dark, I take out my bow with the silver arrows, and I hit him with it. He goes down, and I grab the Triforce of Power. I go into the next room, rescue Zelda, and the credits start. All in all, this final dungeon took me just under 3 hours. My total playtime was just under 8.5 hours. And according to the file select screen, I died exactly 50 times, which is kind of strange considering I died the exact same amount of times last time I played. So, now that the game's done, I want to point out something in the credits. If you watch the entire credits through, the name Miyamoto actually never appears, despite it being well known that this is one of the series that he created. Through a little research, I've seen that this is because they feared talent poaching from other gaming companies. Saying that, I don't exactly trust the sources to say this with certainty, so don't take that as any fact, just a fun possibility. But anyways, moving on to the actual game itself, there are a few final thoughts I want to go over. First off, the items. Let's go over the pointless items first. The meat, the ladder, the raft. The meat is the worst item. I know it can be used to attract enemies, but considering you can only carry one at a time, and the cost of the item itself, it isn't something I would ever want to use. The raft, and to a lesser extent the stepladder, are next on my list. Honestly, they kind of serve the same purpose, to go over water. The ladder does get a little more use being able to be used to walk over water in dungeons, but ultimately, I think the 2 items should have been 1 item. I also think they should have been flippers and allow you to swim, but that might have been a lot to ask from an NES game, so I'll just leave it at that. Moving on, we have the upgradable items. First, the candle. This should have been a single infinite use item from the start. feels like it has no good offensive uses. And while searching for secrets, it sucks having to leave the screen and come back just to use it a second time. Up next, we have the Magic Rod and the Magic Book. I can't believe I found the book first and not the rod. It is actually a very fun item to use, but I think both places you get the item should have the Magic Rod first until you pick it up, and then the other one changes to the Magic Book. Same goes with the Boomerang, but again, this might have been NES limiting it. Beyond that, I think most of the items serve their purpose well, though some are a bit underused. Other than that, the main thing I want to talk about is the fact that the game often lets you move on to do stuff that you cannot do unless you have a certain item. For example, you can face Goma without ever having received the bow and arrows. I think the worst case, though, is the fact that you can go into Ganon's room without the silver arrows. Honestly, it wouldn't be too bad if the door didn't shut behind you, but because it does, the only way to continue on is by dying from Ganon on purpose if you go in without the silver arrows. Moving on, though, there isn't much else to talk about. There is hardly any story inside the game itself, other than the fact that you have to collect all 8 shards of the Triforce of Wisdom so that you can face Ganon and rescue Zelda. And honestly, at this point there's not much else to talk about that I didn't mention while playing the game. I mentioned the freedom the game gives you, I mentioned some of my exploration. My god, did I mention the things wrong with Dungeon 7. Like I said before, that could easily be the worst dungeon in not just the original Legend of Zelda, but the entire series. And yet, it is the dungeon I will remember most from this original game. Well, I guess that's it. Next time, we'll be looking at one of the worst Zelda games. According to the fans, anyways. But is it really that bad? I guess we'll find out next time when I take on Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. So tell me, what do you all think? Do you disagree with my opinions? Or do you think that I'm absolutely right? Whichever it is, let me know down below. I love discussion on things like these. I'm Innes, and until next time, game on.